Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Oxbridge economics webinar. So let me just share my screen. I would actually strongly recommend you to join with a parent. So if you have a parent who's available, even for the first half an hour, 40 minutes, that'll be really good because we're going to be looking at, the application process, the statistics, how hard the tests are. And in the second half, we're going to be doing more content, right? So your parents might not find that bit as interesting, but we do tend to find that parents really benefit from, and you will benefit from, your parents understanding what the application process is going to be for the beginning. So feel free to go grab your parents while we get everyone to join. In the meantime, I would quickly just talk about what we see on the screen here. Today, we are going to be giving you a lot of information about applying to Oxford and Cambridge for economics and related courses. But you can find a lot more information as well in our book, which you can see here called the Oxbridge Formula. And that's available on Amazon. So you could either scan the QR code if you wanted to find out more, or go to oxbridgeformula.co.uk/Amazon-book. Now, the reason I recommend this is we go into a lot of detail. We're going to be mentioning briefly what the courses are like and the difference between them today. But comparing the Oxford and Cambridge courses, we go into a lot more detail about the tests, which again, we're going to talk about in a lot of detail today, are described. You can see what example questions are like in the book, and also interview scripts, supercurricular activities, books to read, podcasts to look at. All of that is detailed in the book, so it's highly recommended. Let's see, how many people do we have on? Okay, so I think what we'll do, we still have people joining. So I will get started though, because I think it's evening off now. So Oxbridge Economics, navigating the seemingly ever-changing application process. Now, why did we name it that? Over the last 5 years, the application process for applying to Oxbridge Economics has changed numerous times. And what we're going to be doing today is looking not only at what those changes are, but also why those changes have occurred. And that's going to be a lot to do with the fact that these courses are already competitive, but becoming even more competitive. And then we're also going to then look at, okay, so these tests have changed. What is the best thing you can do to prepare? So before we do that, I'm going to introduce you to some of us who have got here, and some of the people who are not on here, but we've got joining us as panelists as well. So my name is Parul. I am the founder here at the Oxbridge Formula. I have a first-class degree from Oxford University, and then I went on to become a teacher. So I taught in top London independent schools for around 10 years. Oh, apparently this might not be the latest presentation. Chris, am I right in thinking that we have got one with more people on it? Let's see. Have I got the right?
Yeah, sorry, Ellen should be on there.
Ah, okay, maybe I have the wrong one then. In which case, let me just have a look. Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody. All right, I will reshare my screen then with the right presentation, which will be helpful for the rest of it anyway. So I don't know if you can see that now. Can you see that? All right, let's see. Aha, yes. Okay, fantastic. Yes, I became a teacher, and I taught in top London independent schools for many years. I was Oxford STEM mentor, and also because maths is a large part of economics, had some part in mentoring the economic students as well for applying to Oxbridge. But the main reason that we started the Oxbridge Formula was that a lot of the time the advice that is given to students is given by humanities teachers, maybe a history teacher or a classics teacher. These tend to be the types of subjects where Oxbridge coordinators or Oxbridge higher education experts in schools come from. And the kind of some of the advice that's given doesn't apply to subjects which have a mathematical or scientific slant, I guess. So we wanted to create something which was very specific in helping students who are going to be applying to these subjects. And that's pretty much what we've created. So we've been running for close to 3/4 of a decade. So we've helped lots and lots of students coming through on the program with us. And Chris is our lead tutor, our founding tutor. So Chris, if you just literally want to say hi, so everyone can see you.
Hi.
Okay, so Chris is absolutely fantastic, really good at explaining difficult concepts and thinks very clearly. Nicola, who we've got as an alumnus, will tell you later about what Chris was like as a tutor. But essentially, Chris also has a first-class degree from Oxford, a master's, and he oversees the educational content on this program. Can I just check, do we have Roberta here? Yes, we've got Roberta. So Roberta is just unmute and say hi quickly to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Okay, so fantastic. Roberta is our lead economics tutor here at the Oxbridge Formula. She is a Cambridge graduate, but again, qualified teacher, has held head of economics positions, senior leadership positions, and is a phenomenal Oxbridge tutor. She's going to be talking to us a little bit later about interview preparation. So Roberta, if you want to unmute and just tell us what people can expect, kind of, I guess, around 2/3 of the way through the...
Yeah. Having done this kind of thing for 15 years, I'm going to tell you towards the end, maybe 3/4 of the way through, about what to say in an interview and what not to say, what an average student would think and how they would show their chains of reasoning, and then what an Oxbridge applicant who is successful would say, and then show you different comparisons of what to do and what not to do, and how to use any stimulus material that you're given, how to dissect it. So stick around for that. It's really good interview tips.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Roberta. The next person I have over here is Rohan. Rohan is a current Cambridge economics student. If you want to say hi, Rohan, to everyone.
Hi, everyone.
So Rohan will be coming in with key bits of information in today's presentation. He's also one of our tutors here at the Oxbridge Formula. So if you're lucky enough to work with us, then you might be being taught by him as well. And we've also got Ellen. Ellen is a current economics and management student at Oxford. Ellen, she's also one of our tutors. So if you want to say hi, that would be fantastic.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, and Ellen, please feel free also to jump in at various points in order to give more information. Okay, I then want to quickly introduce our programs consultants. So Jansu and Ruby, if you just, Ruby, want to say hi.
Hi everyone.
And then Jansu.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, fantastic. And we're joined by Nicola as well. So Nicola, if you just want to say hi to everyone quickly.
Hey everyone, hello.
Nicola is a former student of ours who was successful in gaining a place at Cambridge, and he'll be kind of talking to us a little bit later about how his experience was. So have I forgotten anyone? Ben is also there. Ben is going to be putting links into the chat at various points for useful things. So let's move on then. So these are just some of the students who have worked with us recently and gained places at Oxford and Cambridge. So let's talk about what we're going to be discussing today. The first thing is, let's compare the Oxford and Cambridge economics courses. We're then going to be looking at how competitive is it to get into Oxford or Cambridge for economics. Then the evolution of Oxbridge economics admissions tests. So you may be aware that the ECHA was used in the past, but now that's changed to TMUA. So we're going to be looking at that whole evolution and why that's happened and what's harder about it. We'll be looking at tricks and techniques for the TSA and TMUA, and also 5 guiding words to help you really have an excellent economics interview answer. And then finally, how to prepare for the admissions test and interview. So we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming up. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A with all of the panelists that you see here today. So firstly, Oxford versus Cambridge. So at Cambridge, how can you study economics? Economics can be studied just by itself as the economics course, or it can be studied in the land economy course, or you could, so Chris, tell us a bit more about this. So the management studies part, or Rohan maybe, do you know how that works?
Yeah, sure. So the way the management studies option works is that you can start off with virtually any sort of degree, for example, economics, and then once you hit around second year, you can switch into management studies, provided that your results in the first 2 years were strong enough.
Okay, fantastic. Excellent. So then at at Oxford, you can study economics either in the economics and management degree, which we're going to talk about a lot more about today, or as part of PPE, or in the history and economics degree. But our main focus for today is going to be the economics course versus the economics and management course. So Let's see. Now, I'm going to quickly go through these, but I would actually really love Rohan and Ellen to jump in with what they also feel are the key differences. Okay, so economics at Cambridge. So, oh gosh, Chris, actually, if you could talk through some of this stuff, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, then I'll just quickly go like row by row. So like comparing the sort of freedom of course choice you have for Cambridge Economics, you have prerequisite courses which include microeconomics and macroeconomics, and potentially some other prerequisites as well. For economics and management, you have overall kind of freer course choice, as it says. You do need to take some economics and some management courses. Also, if you like, maybe if you want to take a course in third year, you need to plan your courses before that, so you've covered like prerequisite material, but you overall have more choice. That said, there are options at Cambridge as well. In terms of the amount of focus on maths, economics is a mathematical degree, but the focus on maths is really heavy at Cambridge. You need to be a very good mathematician. And then at Oxford, maths A level is required, but there's not as big a focus on maths. If we look at like what kind of topics you're studying, for Cambridge Economics, obviously you're studying economics. It doesn't have the and management part, but that does mean you can branch out a bit, maybe go into more depth in some areas. Whereas for economics and management, obviously it's a joint degree and you cover management as well, but that does mean you get to look at the kind of economics from a management point of view, like looking at businesses. And then just some particular course options that just to give you a flavour of what you could study at each university. So Cambridge, say labour economics, international trade, the history of the Great Depression. Oxford, economics and management, some more management-y topics like marketing, entrepreneurship, and strategic management.
Okay, great. Rohan or Ellen, is there anything more that you wanted to say on that? Any other points that you wanted to add? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to just jump in here. I think obviously at Oxford Economics and Management, one of the huge draws of it is the fact that there is this freer choice of courses. So I really enjoyed the fact that there was nothing that was completely mandatory for the finals. However, you know, as they say, you do have to take some economics and some management, so you can't completely just skew it in either direction. You have to take at least 2 papers in each course. But yeah, I think that the economics and management at Oxford gives some great options to do more like interesting and applied papers rather than just theoretical papers, such as marketing and entrepreneurship, which are 2 papers that I've studied and have really enjoyed.
Okay, fantastic. Rohan, did you want to talk about further study and how you know some people feel that Cambridge could be a better foundation for that?
Yeah, sure. I think especially with the mathematical focus at Cambridge, it really helps for graduate studies or people who are aiming to do that, for example, after undergraduate, heading into masters and potentially even PhDs. I know that Cambridge Economics definitely has a strong basis for American university applications, especially for graduate courses. Another thing as well is on the idea of specialization in specific courses. So in first year, it's definitely the case that all students in a Cambridge Economics degree have to take the same 5 modules and there's no freedom of choice. But as the degree progresses, there become more and more optional modules. So in second year, there's 1, and in final year, there's 2.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Oh, Chris, just talk to me a bit more about this then.
Well, so this is just to kind of reinforce, there is obviously a significant overlap. They are both economics degrees. You are at least encouraged at Oxford to cover all the core modules you would cover at Cambridge, like macro and microeconomics and econometrics. And if you want to study more management style stuff at Cambridge, you can in some options, like say finance. And then as Rohan was saying, like, okay, if you want to go into further study, then the strong maths background is especially useful. Just one more thing to say is that sometimes people don't choose so much based on their course content. They really care about which university they want to go to or which city they want to live in. And that's also perfectly fine. If that's going to make a big difference to you, then you can choose on that basis.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. In terms of job prospects then, so you can see if you study economics at a top university, you know, your median graduate salary after 5 years is pretty high. And to give you an example, after 5 years, you're earning around 71,000 for Oxford E&M, 61,000 for Cambridge Economics, and comparing that even to LSE is at 55,000. So there are just in terms of why you might want to study there, monetary benefits to having an Oxbridge degree. But if we compare that, I guess, just to the median Oxbridge salaries as well, clearly people who study economics end up going into high-flying careers. And also just comparing that to median Russell Group universities, there is a big difference there. So that's something just to be aware of. I don't think it's a reason to apply, but it's something to be aware of. And where do Oxbridge graduates end up? So just looking at this word cloud, consultancy, finance, banking seem to be big ones, but also things like risk management, research, accountancy, sales, not-for-profit organizations, think tanks, etc., and teaching are all other options. Just how does that compare between Oxford and Cambridge? Well, we can see that for Oxford, the banking component is a much higher proportion. I should say that the economics and management course is a lot smaller. I would say probably about half the size compared to the Cambridge course in terms of number of spaces available. But if we're just looking purely at the proportions, then more people tend to go into banking and investment and consultancy. And you can see here that a lot more, a higher proportion of people going to further study from Cambridge. Also, financial services is quite a big one for economics. Not to say that it isn't here, but it might be in the other. And a lot of people from Cambridge go into public sector or policy work as well. Okay, so how competitive are Oxford and Cambridge? We've seen the big benefits of being able to go there. That's just some of the benefits. I mean, I think the other benefits are the fact that you're going to be in a highly academic atmosphere. It's a very, I don't know, Rohan, I don't know if you could talk to us a little bit about what it's like studying, how does it feel? Like, why did you want to go to Oxford or Cambridge in the first place? Like, what are the advantages of studying at an Oxford university?
Yeah, sure. I think there's definitely quite a bit of prestige attached with Oxbridge, and I think that's kind of something I'd really heard as I was growing up. And yeah, there were definitely various reasons for why I wanted to choose Cambridge over Oxford, but I think one of the biggest reasons, especially since this is an economics webinar, is that I really wanted to try and flesh out as much economics as I could. And I thought if I wanted to focus directly on economics, that Cambridge economics would be the course for me. And yeah, in terms of how it's like studying here, honestly, I guess once you're inside, it's not as bad as people might think. It's definitely very manageable and really, really interesting. In terms of the teaching system, there's the unique idea of like supervision / tutorials. That's quite unique to Oxbridge, and that's definitely really enjoyable and helpful for trying to further your development. So overall, I definitely think it's quite an enjoyable process, and I would 100% recommend applying.
Okay, fantastic. Right, I'll come back to you, Ellen, with asking another question later. So how competitive are the courses? So you're probably aware that Oxford Economics and Management is the most competitive course in the whole of Oxford and Cambridge, with a success rate of around 5%. So look, I guess around 1,700 people apply. And then Oxford doesn't interview that many candidates. It uses the admissions test to just select the best candidates for interview. So I guess around 350 people are interviewed. And of that, I guess I think it's 89, if I'm not mistaken, people are taken for the economics course. So yeah, quite a tough process. Not that much easier at Cambridge, though, I might add. We've got a success rate of around 10%. Slightly fewer people do tend to apply, but Cambridge does interview more people. They use the admissions test as more of a deselection process. So they're deselecting students who they don't feel would be a good fit based on the test. And then they use the interview and test together in order to decide who to take. And you can see that, I guess, just looking at this, I don't know the exact number, I can't remember, but it's around 150 students. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So both incredibly competitive processes. So just to give you a few more stats, the average offer holder at Cambridge has 7 GCSEs at grade 8 to 9. And the average offer holder at Oxford has 10 8s or 9s at GCSE. I should say average, because of course there will be variation. There will be people who are getting less than that, or people who are getting more. But this is just to give you an idea. In terms of predicted grades, as an average, offer holders at Cambridge have 3.3 A stars predicted at A level. And Oxford offer holders have 3.4 A stars predicted at A level. The standard offer for Cambridge is A star, A star, A. So you can see that the average offer holder is surpassing this expectation quite some way. And similarly here, the expectation is only to get an A star AA, but as you can see, the average offer holder has more than 3. So just to give you some ideas on that, I just want to say, for year groups affected by the pandemic, Oxford says the following: we will take into account the difficult circumstances in which these grades were issued, the GCSE grades, when we assess your application. Tutors will want to see how you improve your academic performance after GCSE and that you do well in your A-levels or other equivalent qualifications. And it does say grades are always taken in context. So I just want to add, that means, say you go to a school where it's very difficult for you to achieve 3 A stars, people just don't achieve those. They will, of course, take that into context, similarly with GCSEs. But they do say still, the higher the better. And then another quote from Oxford: for UK students applying for an undergraduate course, we look at information about the applicant's school, their neighbourhood, and their experience in the care system. Applicants from the most disadvantaged backgrounds will be strongly recommended to be shortlisted for interview, provided that, number 1, they are predicted to achieve the standard conditional offer for the course. So, you have to get the predicted grades, otherwise you can forget it, basically. And that they perform, 2, an appropriate standard in any required pre-interview admissions test. So if you feel your GCSE grades haven't been as good as they could have been, but you can redeem yourself by getting an extremely good score in the admissions test, then you are still very much in the running. So that's very, very important to bear in mind. Okay, so let's look at the trends over the last few years. So this data is looking at the 2018 to 2021 years, and we can see that the number of applicants for Cambridge Economics has increased year upon year upon year. I would say, basically a 50% increase over those 4 years. And interestingly, the number of spaces, or the number of students interviewed, and the number of offers given out, and the number of people making those offers has pretty much remained constant. So the course is getting more and more competitive every year. And I think I'll just also add, I don't have a fancy graph to show you, but for Oxford Economics, that number is an increase of 30%. So there is an increase all round, I think in just terms of Oxbridge applications, but specifically for economics, there is an increase. So you might think to yourself, well, gosh, given that it's so competitive, should I actually bother applying? And our answer is yes. What are some of the benefits of applying to an Oxbridge course? I think Rohan's already hit on a few of those, but preparing for Oxbridge will undoubtedly make you better at your subjects. So your A-level subjects, your IB subjects, your economics, your maths. By preparing for that Oxbridge application process, you will get better at what you're doing at school. Sometimes people have this counterintuitive idea that they have to be really amazing at A-levels in order to do Oxbridge preparation. But it's like, well, also, if you're doing your Oxbridge preparation and you're getting the right support and the right help, that's also going to make you better at your A-levels. Secondly, preparing for the Oxbridge application process means that you are going to hit the ground running at any university. And I can give you my personal experience for that. Look, I'm not an economist. I studied maths at Oxford, and I had that Oxford offer. I didn't need to sit the step papers, which are the Cambridge test for maths. But I wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to learn something more. I wanted to go beyond what I needed. So I studied for those exams. Back then, quite a few years ago, I went to my examinations officer and said, can you enter me for these exams? Which wasn't done back then. I think it was about 17 years ago now, so quite a long time ago. But in the process of preparing for STEP, an exam I didn't actually need, I basically ended up hitting the ground running when I went to Oxford. I got a first in every single exam, and I'm not a genius. So something about that preparation that I did there really prepared me to do well in my degree. And I think if you prepare for Oxbridge, yes, let's hope that you get in. But if you don't, I can promise you that knowledge and that those skills you learn are going to come in useful at any top university that you decide to apply to and go to. And lastly, you don't want to regret not trying. If this sounds like, if this atmosphere of going to Oxford or Cambridge sounds like somewhere where you'd really thrive, then you don't want to regret not having tried in the first place. Right, the evolution of the Oxbridge economics admissions tests. Okay, so let's see. AS levels, you can still do AS exams, but for the most part, AS levels were phased out between 2015 and 2018. And, over the last few years, several students had centre-assessed GCSE grades because of the pandemic, etc., which meant that the interviews moved to an online process. Whether that's going to continue or not, we're not sure. But even if things go back to being in person, definitely there is still a sense that interviews might remain online. Now, we've already discussed that Cambridge has had a huge increase in applications over the last few years. So what does that mean in terms of admissions tests? Well, initially, back in 2015, there didn't used to be a test at all. And then in 2016, this test, the ECHA, was introduced. And initially, the format of the ECHA was a section on maths, a section on problem solving. And we're going to see some problem solving as it is in the TSA later. And also the essay section as well. And now we're going to be looking at, and then what happened is the ECHA problem solving was removed and it was replaced with harder maths. So basically it became maths and advanced maths and then an essay, okay? And most recently, the ECHA has been scrapped. I think it was decided it wasn't hard enough. It wasn't testing maths in a hard enough way. So then it was switched to the TMUA. The TMUA is called the Test of Mathematics for University Admissions. It originally was used for maths candidates, then it was used for computer science students at Cambridge, and now it's been adopted by Cambridge to be used as the admissions test. So what's interesting here is the amount of maths has just been increasing and getting harder and harder and harder. And actually in the admissions test, the economics component has slightly reduced. The other thing that happened due to the pandemic is that the test has moved online as well. So these are some of the changes. Now I want to explain quickly why these changes have taken place, but I believe that we have an issue with the presentation. Chris, am I right in thinking that again?
I think that slide won't show. I can describe some of the stats if you want.
So I think if you could just unhide them, save it as the next version, I'll open that presentation. That'd be fantastic. Okay, while we do that, go on, I might as well just show you the stuff about the program. So what is included when you work with us? We're going to give you access to, and Nicola did a really good job of mentioning all the resources, around 800 plus video solutions. So we are looking at a huge number of questions and accompanying video solutions, which is really beneficial because, again, as was mentioned, it's not about knowing what to do in the question. It's about knowing what to do and knowing what to do quickly because it's so time pressured. So here in these videos, we're describing all the thought processes that the tutors are going through when they're working through the questions. So you start to learn to think like them and can access those questions quickly. We also have weekly workshops in maths, TMUA specific workshops, economics discussion workshops, and so on. Intensive summer courses, group interview courses, and one-to-one mock interviews, and of course, as we've mentioned already, one-to-one tuition. So while we're waiting for that slide, if you feel like you'd want to explore working with us, then feel free to go to oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. It is a parent-student consultation, so do book it at a time when you are available. Now, I believe the new presentation has been added, so bear with me 1 second. Sorry about all the issues with the presentations, guys. I can't see it. No. Okay. Chris, I don't know if you want to share your screen quickly while we do those slides, just because I can't seem to find that. All right.
Okay.
In any case, what I wanted to do is basically talk about why have the tests become more and more mathematical? And we had some slides on that, but I think they've been hidden in this presentation. So just bear with us for 1 second. Okay, what I'm also going to do is quickly then talk about the TSA. So the TSA is an exam, and we're going to go into what that exam consists of in a few minutes. But one of the aspects of it was an essay. At the end, you'd have to write an essay. So here's some typical TSA essays. So is humanism a religion, or do non-human animals have opinions? Do they have beliefs? These are the kind of questions you'd have to answer. Now, the TSA is also used for PPE. And when we look at the correlation between what an Oxford politics paper looks like and what the TSA question looks like, we can see that there are quite a lot of similarities. So the questions are quite open-ended, as you can see here. You know, in what senses are courts political? What best accounts for the stability of hybrid regimes, for example? But if we compare what these TSA questions are like to Oxford management questions, these questions are a lot more specific, right? So what is the matching principle? But it doesn't just ask you an open-ended question. It then says concisely explain with one good example. Concisely explain and critically review this statement and concisely summarize your reply. So what happened is the TSA is split into two sections, a multiple choice section and an essay section. But for economics and management, 2 years ago, the essay part was removed for economics and management applicants. However, it's still there for PPE. So we believe, our conjecture is, one of those reasons is that these questions don't really reflect that well how an economics and management student is expected to think. Now, I can say my piece, but Ellen, I would like to ask you, if you don't mind, as somebody who probably sat the TSA and now obviously does economics and management, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's quite funny actually, because just looking at the slide now, my TSA was this TSA question that you've got on the board. So I actually wrote question number 3 for my TSA exam. So that's quite funny to see it popping back up again. But yeah, generally, these questions look like they're from the accounting paper, which I personally didn't sit, but from my own personal experience, the management questions are a lot more precise. So under marketing, it would be critically evaluate a particular segmentation method, for example, and you'd have to go into a really deep dive on this one particular segmentation method, bring in lots of critical analysis from different authors, etc., etc. So I wouldn't say it matches up brilliantly with the TSA style questions. And also the TSA style questions, as you mentioned, are targeted at not just Oxford E&M. And so often there's only really one question on that list, which is a bit more economics based. So in this example, question number 3 is the only really one that has a bit more of a relation to economics and management itself. But yeah, generally I'd say that the management questions definitely are much more lengthily worded, often have a bit of a statement. So it will have a particular statement, be like, strategy follows structure. And then, you know, well, to what extent do you agree with this? So it's a bit more discussive, you know. Yeah, I'd say that I agree with everything that Parul has said about why it's being phased out as well.
Yeah, okay, so that's, I guess, one other change. So we're talking about the evolution of the admissions tests. You know, the TSA used to consist of critical thinking, problem solving, and an essay, and it still does. But now, so that's the online, the multiple choice section and the essay. So what happened recently? It's moved online, and the essay has been removed for economics and management applicants. And yeah, it's moved online. So Chris, are we ready for those slides on the maths? If you could just share your screen very quickly.
Yeah.
And then I'll switch back to my presentation afterwards. Okay, fantastic. So how important is math? So now we said the application process has become a lot more mathematical. Let's just justify that. Let's see what the motivation for that is. How important is maths? So these are offer holders. The first circle there, pie chart there, is offer holders for Cambridge Economics. And you can see that the vast majority of candidates do have further maths already. So if you want to test somebody's maths, then knowing that they do further maths isn't really enough, because most people do further maths. So they needed something harder in order to differentiate between candidates. just to see what it is for economics, although further maths is not a requirement, we can see that around 40% of students do have further maths. I think in economics in general is relatively mathematical, so the more maths you can do, it would be helpful, but it's not a requirement at Oxford. So as I said, Maths A-level is required for both courses. Further maths isn't required, by the way, at Cambridge, but the vast majority of candidates do have it. Some Cambridge colleges actually, oh, sorry, I'm wrong. Some Cambridge colleges do require an A or an A star in further maths. I don't know if anybody's aware of what proportion that is. That'd be quite interesting to know if anyone is aware. And if you aren't currently studying further maths, then what we would recommend is that you should consider doing some modules or an AS level or in maths. I would say an EPQ in maths probably isn't actually that helpful. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's the statistics modules in particular that could be really helpful. Rohan, would I be right in thinking that? If somebody didn't do further maths, what modules would be good ones for them to catch up with? Or what topics?
Yeah, I think the statistics modules, some parts of it could be helpful. More generally, it's just the sort of problem-solving skills that you acquire during maths and further maths that are more transferable, because by and large, the content that's examined in a degree in Cambridge economics is going to be different to the things that you cover in A-level.
Okay, so it's basically more maths will make you better at problem solving, which will make you better at admissions tests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is actually the whole premise of our program here at the Oxbridge Formula. We want to get you good at critical thinking, and we want to get you good at problem solving. So as Nicola said, no matter what is thrown at you in the interview or the admissions test, you have the underlying skills to be able to answer those. Now, what do Cambridge say? Cambridge says successful applicants have often shown academic excellence in a wide range of GCSE subjects. This bit I thought was really interesting, including a grade 9 for maths. So actually specifying a grade 9 there. Normally they only talk about grade 8s and 9s, but that's really interesting. The economics course in Cambridge assumes that you are very proficient in mathematics. And I actually want to add there, the Oxbridge Formula program assumes that you're already very proficient in mathematics. You're presumed to have fully mastered the material in the A-level math syllabus before starting the course. The compulsory first-year course in quantitative methods, which covers maths and stats, builds on this material, including the stats component of the A-level syllabus. If you're taking the further maths course at AS level or A-level, you'll benefit from focusing more on statistics and further pure mathematics. Okay. Is there any more, Chris? Or
No, that's the end of those two slides.
okay, fine. So I think basically that motivates why they are really testing you so much with this new TMUA exam. And the next thing we're going to do is look at what these exams actually are. So let me just share my screen again. Do I have the right presentation? Okay. So, all right. So let's quickly talk about the TSA and the TMUA. What are they? I think I've gone into a little bit of detail, but we'll look at more. Both of these exams are sat in November of year 13. They are both pre-interview tests. Normally, this is like the first week back after October half term. You'll sit these exams. Now, the TSA is 90 minutes long, 1.5 hours. And the TMUA is 2.5 hours, and it's split into 2 papers. Each of the papers is 1 hour, 15 minutes. And you basically sit them back to back. Like it's kind of like it's one exam, but there's 2 different papers. What is tested? Now, as I said already, problem solving and critical thinking are tested in TSA paper 1 for the for economics at Oxford. And maths knowledge and mathematical reasoning is tested in the TMUA. I think it's mathematical reasoning there is quite vague. Paper 1 of the TMUA is quite A-level style, but paper 2 is, the actual name for it is proof and logic. It has its own syllabus and you're expected to kind of learn a lot of this stuff, which I think if you're not a mathematician, is quite a big ask. So there's going to be quite a big jump here for Cambridge economics applicants to overcome. And I'm going to show you what the questions look like in just a second. How many questions? Well, we've got 50 multiple choice questions in TSA, 25 problem solving, 25 critical thinking. And in the TMUA, each paper has 20 multiple choice questions in it. So overall, you have 40 multiple choice questions. You have 108 seconds, 1 minute and 48 seconds to answer a TSA question on average. In the TMUA, you have a bit more time, but the questions are a lot more in depth. 3 minutes, 45 seconds. And are you allowed a calculator or dictionary in either? No, you won't be allowed one in either of them. Okay, so that's the basics, but now let's get into what these questions actually look like. So TSA, no A-level content is required. Problem solving is like quantitative reasoning, spatial reasoning, algorithmic reasoning. And in critical thinking, you basically read a passage and you have to identify what was the main conclusion, what are the assumptions, what are the flaws, what kind of reasoning is used in this paragraph. It can be useful to revisit GCSE maths, things like ratio, proportion, speed, distance, time. And here is, and Chris, I don't know if you want to quickly just talk us through these questions very, very quickly.
Yeah, okay, so the first one coming up is just showing you might have to read data from tables very quickly and then read and understand the problem. Same goes for graphs, so you have to analyze graphical data and draw conclusions. I think there's another one. So those two kinds of problem solving questions. We'll see some more later. This is a critical thinking question where you read a passage. In this case, you're asked for the flaw in the argument. And that's a typical kind of critical thinking question.
And remember, you only have 108 seconds for each of these questions. It is incredibly time pressured. I cannot emphasize the TSA is a hugely time pressured exam. Okay, so that's basically a snapshot of the TSA. Now let's look at a snapshot of the TMUA, Chris.
Yeah, so here we've got just a selection of questions just to show some topics that might come up. So this is maybe like paper 1 where you're just being tested on your understanding of maths A level, though with harder problem solving. So some things that make it harder, you can see we've got these sums and integrals everywhere. We've got kind of a weird graph where it goes up and down. It doesn't look like any function you've seen before, probably. We got one with a bunch of mod signs, and it's also, might be hard to see the subscripts, but it's a recursive function. It's defining fn plus 1 in terms of fn. And then there is an equation with some logs in and x's and y's. And it asks for the length of the curve, which is a very strange question to be asked. You have to figure out what's going on there that would lead you to be able to find out the length of the curve.
So I think what I really want to emphasize here is just even looking at those, they seem quite unusual I think to an A-level student, they are quite unusual questions. And remember, this test is technically aimed at mathematicians. So you're kind of having to get to that level. So yeah, it's quite a big ask, I would say. In terms of paper 2 then, Chris, for the TMUA, this is a proof and logic paper. Tell us a bit more.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions here. The top one is basically showing you an argument, and it tells you the argument is wrong, and you've got to figure out which line is wrong. And that's a common kind of paper 2 question. You've got to figure out what the mistake is. And then you can see question 12 at the bottom, where you've got some statements that are about sort of arbitrary polynomials, so it's a bit abstract. And they're if-then statements, so they really like statements about conditionals. And you can see we've got some inequalities, some integrals there, so there's still maths content that you've got to figure out which of them are true. By the way, it's not like one of these has to be true. It could be, your answers could be 1 and 2 or 1 and 3, so on. So you've got to work out exactly which ones are true.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of work to do, I think, in 3 minutes, which I think we're going to see in a second as well. So how are the TSA and TMUA used? They are used pre-interview to decide who to invite to interview. And as we saw from the graphs earlier, it is especially, it's important for both, but Oxford will not invite you if you don't get a good score in the TSA, whereas for Cambridge, they might invite you if you don't get as good a score, but then at the end, Cambridge will combine it with your interview performance in order to decide who to make an offer to. So they'll make more interview offers, but then also consider your score in the TMUA when they are deciding who to make offers to, as well as your interview performance. The reason for these tests is to test your mental agility for harder or unfamiliar problems. And are you familiar with key ideas or techniques? They are testing your ability, and how well can you apply them to unfamiliar questions? This is just from Oxford. How important is a TSA for shortlisting? So they say the TSA is one of the most important factors to be shortlisted for interview, together with predicted grades. I think in pandemic years, the GCSEs won't be as important, but they are taken into consideration by Oxford as well. And in terms of just comparing the different aspects, I'd say personal statement forms an important but smaller chunk in terms of kind of getting in, what's more important in the application process, whereas admissions tests and interview are a bigger proportion in terms of what is used when making that decision by the admissions tutors. Okay, so let's quickly look at the timeline then. So you're going to do your UCAS form is going to be due in October, and you're going to write your personal statement up until that point and submit it. Then the test will be at the beginning of November, and you should start your TSA or TMUA preparation as soon as possible. So as Nicholas said, he worked with us for quite a few months, not just a week or 2 months at the end. So begin your TSA and TMUA preparation as soon as possible. Interviews, although they're in December, some people are tempted to think, oh, let me spend this like 3-week period here doing my interview preparation. It's not enough time. Okay, so how challenging are the TSA and TMUA? How is the TSA marked? So raw scores are converted on this weird scale. So I'm going to ask Chris to explain this because I can't quite understand it myself. Like we've got it bunched up around the edges and quite far apart here. So Chris, can you kind of explain this graph and what it's showing to us?
Firstly, the point is that like every year the distribution should be roughly the same, but obviously the difficulty of the questions does matter. So they kind of judge from how many people got each question right, how difficult they were, and then score people according to that.
So I just want to emphasize, when you say score, that is a scaled mark, which they're using this model to build, to figure out. Yeah. Okay.
And so the average is somewhere around 60, but you can kind of see that at least when they're sort of sorting candidates into like bins, if you imagine like statistical bins, like between 60 and 65, there's I think 5 bars here. So it kind of sorted you into 5 categories. And then between say 80 and 85 is maybe 2. By the way, these are approximate numbers. It's actually like it's more precise than this. Like the boundaries might be like 59.5 or something. But that's because the more candidates are clustered in the middle, and they want to tell you apart from the people who score close to you. So they just sort of analyze that data in a finer fashion. They split it into smaller bars. And that's why the 60 and 65 are further apart, because they've subdivided that more than the larger numbers, which are close together because they've subdivided between them less.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think scoring 70 or above will make your application stand out. The higher score you can get in the TSA, the more you're going to stand out. We remember for economics at Cambridge, Oxford, E&M, we want to get into the top 5%. So yeah, scoring 75 or above is showing that you are have very good thinking skills. So we couldn't find a graph for E&M, but E&M is like doubly competitive compared to PPE, and this is the graph for PPE. So looking at this very quickly, the gray bars are people who did the TSA but weren't interviewed. Then the orange bars were people who were interviewed but not offered a place, and the blue bars are people who were interviewed and got a place for PPE. So we can see that even at gaining a mark of 70 to 75, you only had around a 1/5 chance, a 20% chance of getting an offer for PPE, for example, but you had a much higher chance of being interviewed. So you had around, I don't know, I guess about 66% chance of being interviewed, 2/3. But the higher up you go, the more your chance of getting in and getting interviewed increases. So if you got between 85 and 90, just looking at that bar, you had around a 75% chance of getting an offer. So all I'm trying to show you from here is it is really important to get a good TSA score because it matters to your application. Both in terms of the likelihood of being interviewed, as you can see here, it's probably around 85 to 90% chance of being interviewed if you've got 75 to 80 and so on and so forth. So the TSA is important.
I just want to add one thing, which is, although the bars at the end are getting very small, you can see the orange bit never goes away, which is people who are interviewed but still didn't get an offer. So the interview does still matter. You can't just say, I got like 50 out of 50 on the TSA, I have to get in. The interview still does matter.
Yeah, even for people who are getting literally 99 or like 95 to 99, some of them still didn't get in. So yeah, the interview is really important. I think the pie chart we showed earlier describes that and shows that. So we looked at the score conversion just now for TSA. In terms of TMUA, remember we said that it was out of 40. So there's 20 questions in the first part, 20 questions in the second part. And this is how it's scaled. So if you got, I think it's like 8 or below. Is it 8 or below, Chris, or 7 or below?
The cutoff depends on the year, but it would be somewhere.
So the first few marks out of 40, you get a grade 1.0. And then the last few marks from 32 onwards, you get 9.0, which is the highest. 9 is the highest. So this, when your TMUA score is converted, you get a score between 1.0 and 9.0. Then in between, it's basically a linear scale. So that's how it works. So if you want to get the highest score, you want to be aiming for around 80% in the TSA, which is tough. Sorry, in the TMUA, which is tough. Like, this isn't an easy paper at all. So I think one thing I'd say is just, if you're, as Nicholas said, or bright candidates here watching this Oxbridge webinar, you're probably used to getting 80s and 90s for everything. You might get slightly lower scores here, but don't be alarmed. You can still do well if you get slightly lower. But what kind of TMUA score does one need? It hasn't been used too frequently for the TMUA hasn't been used long enough for economics yet. But if we look at the computer science data, the average, this isn't even the cutoff, this is the average offer holder for Cambridge had a score of 7.0. So yeah, you want to be scoring quite well in order to have a good chance. That would help. Okay, Chris, let's talk a little bit about the problem solving section then. So should we, what do we want to do with this?
Well, I think we're going to give people the chance to do some of these times. So what we'll do is we'll show you some example, we'll do TSA first and then we'll do TMUA. So we'll show some example questions. We'll give you a realistic amount of time to try each one. You might want to grab some paper if you want to do any working out. And then we'll give you your 108 seconds for each TSA question.
Okay, right. So everyone grab your pen, grab a piece of paper. We're going to be doing some in time conditions because we want you to experience the pressure that you're going to be under for these TSA questions. And then afterwards, Chris is going to go through the solution. So Chris, quickly read out the question and then 108 seconds, go.
Okay, I'll just read this. It says, the 400 seats in the parliament are divided amongst 5 political parties. No 2 parties have the same number of seats and each has at least 20 seats. What is the largest number of seats that the 3rd largest party can have? We've got 5 options: 22, 118, 119, 120, and 121.
Hey, I've started my timer. So everybody put in the chat once you figured it out, A, B, C, D, or E, and put it in the chat to us. Okay, we've had one answer. Okay, we've had 2 answers coming so far. Oh my gosh, I've done the timer wrong. I've done 1 hour 40. Did you do a timer, Chris?
I didn't start it because I thought you.
Okay, I think I know. I'm good. I figured it out. So far, 3 people have responded. "20 seconds left, roughly." Okay, if you don't have an answer in 5, 4, you're gonna have to guess. Time's running out, guys. Guess. 3, 2, 1. Okay, all right. So quite a lot of C's came through, a couple of D's, a couple of B's, a few E's. So definitely a variety. So Chris, do you want to quickly go through how you would do this question? Oh, can I just ask, if you haven't guessed right now, just guess. I want everyone to guess. Quickly put something in the chat. This is what you'd have to do in the real exam. So, okay, C's, E's, D's, B's, C's. All right, definitely a large variety. Nobody said A. So yeah, go for it, Chris.
Okay, so if you want to just go to the next slide, I think well, the first thing to do when reading a question is to maybe do some underlining. So what are the key parts of the question? So we got, okay, 400 seats, 5 political parties. Says no two have the same number of seats. That's going to be, so this is a constraint type question. We're given some constraints on how the seats are divided. We've got to work out a number from that. So we want to carefully note all the parts of the constraint. And it says each has at least 20. And that's the last part of the constraint. And if we look at the third largest party, I'll quickly say what this reminds me of. This reminds me of a slightly simpler type of question where you're asked to maximize, so an easier version of this would be like, what's the largest number of seats the smallest party can have? And whenever you want to make the smallest of something have as much as possible, it means you want to make the things as equal as possible. So here we kind of want to make the parties, we want to make the third largest party as close as possible to the first and second. And I think we have some notes that come up here. Yeah. So if you sometimes either a mental or an actual picture on paper can help you. We imagine our parties in order. We want to make this third one as big as possible. So 4 and 5 we can make as small as we like. We kind of want to squish those. We can give more seats to party 3. And we want to take seats away from 1 and 2, but they still have to stay bigger than 3. So if we make 3 as big as possible, keeping 1 and 2 bigger, that means 1, 2, and 3 are all going to be similar in size. So then, okay, let's apply our parts to our constraint one by one. I would also say this is a very typical thing in TSA, like they call them procedure questions. So you're trying to work out a procedure that will give you the answer. So it's easier to start with the smaller 2 parties because we have extra information, which is that they have to have at least 20. So the least we can give them is 20. Can we give them both 20? Unfortunately, it's not allowed. We have to give the fourth largest 21 because remember our other part of the constraint, which we would have underlined, 2 can't have the same number. And then we've got 359, which we have to split between 3 parties. And that initially seems complicated because you can't divide it by 3. So a trick here is, okay, let's imagine it was still 360. Let's divide that by 3 and then we'll just correct. So if we had 360 seats remaining to divide it to 3, it'd be 120 each. And then first we'll apply the constraint that no 2 parties can have the same number as each other. So that we'll just add 1 to the larger and take 1 off the smaller. But we had 1 extra seat, right? So we had 1 less seat than this. We had only 359. So we have to take a seat off someone, and we have to take it off the smallest party because otherwise 2 parties would have the same. So we take it off the smallest of those 3, which is the third largest party, and that gives us 118, and that's our answer. So our answer is B.
Yeah, I think a lot of people put 119 as the answer. So they do like to trick you to be honest. So okay, so the answer was B. Fantastic. Okay, this next one, guys, 108 seconds. I'm going to try and get it right now. Starting now. Go for it.
Do you want me to read this while people are starting?
Yeah, okay, read it.
So it says we've got a solid cube with 6 different shapes drawn on the 6 faces. We're shown a plan view with all the shapes. That's basically a net. It's placed on the path on the right with the arrows on it, with the triangular shape facing up. The cube is rolled 1 face at a time forward along the route shown, so following the arrows, from the start position until the end position. And we're asked which of these shapes is facing up when it reaches the end position. So our options are square, circle, triangle, rectangle, and kind of sort of a ring.
Okay, person coming through. Oh, that's it. Time up. Everyone guess. You got 5 seconds. Put the guess in the chat. We've got A, D, B, D, C, D, A, D. Chris, put in the chat for me what the answer is, please. A, C, D, C, D, 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 D. Okay, definitely quite a mix there in terms of answers. C, D. Right, the answer, well, we're not going to do the answer. Chris, going to go through how you're going to do this?
Yeah, okay, so if you just want to bring up the next slide, I think it has a couple of methodological points, like 1 and 2. So firstly, a very common, this is a spatial reasoning question. So it's about manipulating shapes, often in 3D. That happens a lot in TSA. And a very useful technique is to look for pointers. So things that point in particular directions, especially like a part of a larger shape. So here our pointer is our triangle, because a triangle, well, this triangle at least is pointing, like where parallel is pointing, it's pointing to the right. Where it's on the track, it's pointing to the left. Right? We always know what direction it's pointing in. And once you know where that is, it actually tells you where all the other shapes are on the cube. Like the cross shape is in front of the triangle, the square is behind it, and so on. And that means that we only need to track the triangle, which makes things much simpler. Rather than tracking all the shapes, we just track the triangle. And then the second useful thing to notice is on that path, we're always rolling 2 each time in each direction. So we roll 2 to the right, 2 down, 2 right. And if you roll a cube twice, you're rolling it 180 degrees. So that means whatever was on the top before is on the bottom afterwards. So we'll use that and tracking the triangle just to see where the triangle is like every 2 squares. So it starts off on the top and then we roll it twice. Because it's rolling kind of in the same line as it's pointing in, it's going to end up pointing in the opposite direction. So Paolo, if you just click a couple of times, we'll show it comes up. It's going to be on the bottom because we rolled twice. And it's going to be pointing the other way. And then we roll it twice more, but now we're rolling perpendicular to the direction it's pointing in. So it's going to stay pointing in that direction. It's like we're rolling around its axis. But we've rolled twice, so it ends up on the top. Then it's a lot like the first one we did. So it goes to the bottom and it flips direction. And actually, because it ends up on the bottom, we don't even care about which direction it's pointing in. In another question, that could have been important, but here it turns out not to matter. Once we see it's on the bottom, we know that the shape on the top must be the one opposite. And for TSA special reasoning questions, you really want to learn to interpret your cube nets quickly. And one thing to know is that 2 squares that are like 2 apart on the net in a straight line are opposite sides of the cube. So the face opposite to the triangle is that rectangle. And if the triangle is on the bottom, that has to be on the top. So our answer is the rectangle, which is D.
Okay, excellent, excellent, fantastic. Thank you very much. I personally find those questions really difficult, so that was very useful for me. Okay, critical thinking, right, 108 seconds to answer this. We won't read it out for you because the whole point is to read everything. So have a go now. I'll put the timer on. Okay. 25 seconds left. Cool. Okay, time's up. Everybody, put your answers in the chat now. Everyone, guess something if you didn't get it. So you've got quite a few C's, D's, E's, a couple of A's. Okay, Chris, talk us through this. Oh, actually, in fact, we've got a video. So Chris made a few of our videos for the problem solving anyway. I think you agree with me, explains it very well. We're actually going to show you one of the videos he's made for this. I just need to share my screen with sound. What I want you guys to look out for is how Chris breaks up the paragraph in the first place and analyzes the paragraph, and then how he analyzes the options to know if they're right or wrong. He uses quite some nice techniques, and we've got different ones for all the different types of questions. And then we're going to move on to the economics interviews, and we'll come back to TMUA in a second. So
this is question 9 from the 2009 TSA. And in this question we asked what most weakens the argument. So let's have a look at the argument. First, we're told that the zoos are unsuitable for animals or not the right places for animals. So since this is talking about what's good for animals, this is the writer's opinion. And then they say that people visit zoos to learn about animal behaviour. So that's just describing why people visit zoos as a fact. But they also say that animals are kept in small and unnatural spaces, which means they act abnormally. So this is a fact about how the animals act. And lastly, they say that zoos should be shut, reallocating the money to protect natural habitats. And this is the writer's opinion on what should be done based on what they've just said. So since this is a should type statement and everything else is a reason why we might think that zoos should be shut, it seems that sentence 3 is the conclusion. And so if we try to summarise the argument, well, the main factual claims about animal behaviour in zoos, so they say people are visiting to learn about the animal behaviour, but because the animals are acting unnaturally, the people who visit aren't going to be learning about how the animals would normally behave. And they also say that zoos aren't the right places for animals. This is going to be partly based on this claim probably, but it also sounds like a more general claim about what's good for animals. And then they conclude that zoos should be shut and the money should be used to protect natural habitats. So when the conclusion has two parts, shut the zoos and use the money for something else, it's important to remember both parts. As we see in this case, some of the options are on the first part and some on the second and some on both. So let's have a look at these options and see which would weaken the argument. So A says that cramped conditions, living in cramped conditions also makes humans neurotic. So being neurotic is one of the ways the passage originally described animals acting abnormally, and it generally means being anxious or depressed. So if living in cramped conditions also makes humans neurotic, and one of the writer's points was that living in cramped conditions makes animals neurotic, would this being true weaken the argument? Well, in fact, it just seems like more evidence that the cramped conditions are to blame, which gives us more reason to shut down zoos. So this would actually seem to strengthen the argument. It's also worth noting this doesn't really address the idea of shutting zoos and protecting natural habitats, so it's unlikely to be the answer. So let's have a look at B. B says that by visiting zoos, school children can learn lots about animals. So how does this relate to the passage? Well, it does say that people visit zoos to learn about animals, but the animals aren't actually behaving normally, and that seems to be a reason for them to want to shut zoos, that you aren't actually learning how animals actually behave. And B seems to be undermining that, so it does seem to weaken the argument. However, as we'll see, there's actually a couple of options that weaken the argument in this case, so I won't conclude this is the correct answer now, we'll just look at the others first. If we look at C, C says that many animals currently living in zoos couldn't live in the wild. Would this weaken the argument? Well, it does seem to weaken it a bit, similar to B, except in this case it's directly attacking the conclusion, because if we're going to shut zoos, basically this is saying what happens to animals in the zoos who wouldn't be able to live in the wild. This is giving us a reason not to shut zoos, and therefore it's weakening the conclusion. If we look at B, B says that protecting natural habitats is very expensive. So this obviously relates to part of the conclusion, protecting natural habitats. Does it weaken the argument? Well, you can read it two ways. So one would be protecting natural habitats is very expensive. So can we be sure that shutting zoos would actually give us enough money to fund that? We might think shutting zoos isn't even going to make a difference because it's so expensive, and that gives us a reason not to do it, or to use the money for something more affordable instead. But at the same time, we could read it as saying, or suggesting that protecting natural habitats is very expensive, therefore we need all the money we can get, and that gives us more reason to shut zoos and use the money to protect natural habitats instead. So since this is something that could strengthen or weaken the argument, and there are other things that only seem to weaken it. This is unlikely to be the answer because that would be unfair. So we can reject this because it could strengthen the argument. So let's look at E. E says that zoos allow endangered species to survive because you can breed endangered species in them and then release them back into the wild. So would this weaken the argument? Well, again, it does seem like it would, because this gives us a reason not to shut zoos. Because if E is true, that might actually lead to endangered species dying out instead. So we have three things that seem to weaken the argument. Now we have to look at them in more detail. Which of these do you think most weakens the argument? Well, firstly, I think I can rule out B. Why is that? One reason is that it's only attacking one of the reasons for closing zoos, rather than attacking the very idea of closing them, whereas C and E would both give us reasons not to shut zoos at all. And another reason is that, okay, children can learn lots at zoos. That doesn't mean they're learning by observing the animals, which is what the argument says is a problem. They could be reading information panels or just learning what the different types of animals are, or other things that don't rely on the animals being in the zoos. So it seems like B doesn't weaken the argument as much as C or E would. And then between C and E, there's one of these I think would only undermine some ways of shutting zoos and not the whole idea of shutting zoos. And that's E. So E says we have to worry about the animals that are currently in zoos. But shutting zoos down doesn't have to mean doing it immediately and without care for the animals that are currently in them. We could stop adding new animals and wait for the current ones to die off and then close the zoo afterwards. Or we could find new homes for the current animals. So C doesn't have to be a problem. It's also worth noting that C only affects a small number of animals currently living in zoos, whereas E would affect whole species if we closed the zoos and that prevented endangered species from surviving. So it seems that C weakens the argument less than E, and E is the correct answer, because it gives us a reason not to shut down zoos at all.
Okay, definitely. Thank you very much for that video, Chris. We have about 800 of those videos for TSA questions in our online bank. So if you did work with us, you would get access to those. And although we took longer than 108 seconds to answer it, the idea is that you start learning how to analyze the options, how to analyze things. You can do it much, much, much quicker yourself in the real thing. So quickly, put in the chat to me, what was one thing you learned about how to analyze critical thinking questions based on that video? Put in the chat to me quickly. And while we are waiting for people's responses, so somebody says, splitting up the passage, direct comparison with the conclusion, breaking down the question, breaking the question into its arguments, separating into key points, thinking critically about each of the. But these are quite vague. When you say thinking critically, what do you mean? Like what was actually done here? Thinking in terms of strengthening and weakening, that seems obvious to me, given that it was a weakening question. So did you learn anything more specific there? Okay, I would like to remind you that you can apply to work with us. Oh, somebody says, summarizing the argument to assess how each of the answers specifically relates to or encounters it, breaking the question into parts and looking how to answer the question by going through each of the parts. I think we can be more specific with this, and this is something that we would teach you on our program, by the way. I need to read the question as I read it incorrectly. Yes, reading the question does help. Okay, so
can I just add a couple of things? Like, one is, obviously there I was re-summarizing it. You wouldn't want to do that in the actual test because that was for the sake of the video. You don't want to be writing it out again, but you can use underlining to help you summarize the argument for yourself. Also, I had some implicit knowledge there, which is that TSA wording is specific to TSA. Like, it has a specific meaning within the TSA. When it asks for something that weakens the argument, or most weakens, they want something that undermines the conclusion, and it prefers something that undermines the conclusion directly over something that just undermines some of the reasons for it. So you have to understand what it means by weakens in that context.
Okay, so yes, so 800 plus TSA questions that you can, all of which have been explained in that format, including critical thinking, problem solving, everything. We have weekly workshops, as I've mentioned already, that we hold. Intensive courses, including TSA, critical thinking and problem solving courses, interview courses, which are economic specific. So, you know, this isn't all subjects and you'll get assigned an economics tutor. This is an economic specific economic specific interview course, which I don't think is available anywhere else. It's very, very unique to us. one-to-one mock interviews with lots of different tutors. It looks here like maybe we only have 3 or 4 economics tutors. We've got a lot of economics tutors, so you can get a lot of different variety. One-to-one tuition as well. We'd allocate you a TSA tutor, a maths tutor, and or an economics tutor, depending on which subject you're applying for. So get yourself booked in to oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. We are going to show you a TMUA question. I know a lot of you are here for the Cambridge Economics course, so stick around. It is going to be really worth seeing what kind of things are asked in the TMUA, by the way. So do stick around, but I think Roberta might have to go. So we're just going to skip forward and go into the how to answer an Oxbridge level, how to answer an economics interview question at Oxbridge level, okay? And we sent you the question. It was about remittances and about people, high-skilled people leaving their own countries. So we are going to quickly talk about this. So I'm going to skip forward and then I'm going to come back to this question in a second. So, okay, so quite a lot here. Sorry. We'll come back to this. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so interviews. An Oxbridge interview is not a job interview. It is like a sample supervision or tutorial, which is like what that 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 teaching that you have at Oxbridge. The kind of things you could get asked, if a G7 country were to default on its debts, what would you expect the economic consequences to be? What makes a tax, quote unquote, fair? Plot this graph, which you might not be expecting a Cambridge degree to be this mathematical, but yeah, plot a graph like that, which looks kind of scary. King's College, Cambridge says you will have a half-an-hour interview preceded by a 1-hour preparation time. This is the instructions that they are giving to their candidates. They say, and it could be different for every college, at the beginning of this preparation hour, you'll be given a handout which contains 3 questions of analytical or mathematical flavor and a recent article from a newspaper. So what are the interviewers looking for? They're looking for how you understand and respond to new ideas or arguments, how teachable you are. Remember that in Oxbridge, you're going to be being taught in these small group sessions. If you can't learn in that environment, if you can't move forward based on the interviewer's feedback, you're not going to be an ideal candidate for Oxbridge. So that's what they're testing. And the skills are argumentation, evaluation and criticism, expressing ideas clearly, and we're going to be looking at clarity as one of the 5 key guiding words, correcting your own thinking as you go along. Maybe you think something, they give you a hint, and then you can actually change your path. Being adaptable is quite good. Using a source. And Cambridge says, good economists, quote, must be a mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher in some degree. They must understand symbols and speak in words. They must contemplate the particular in terms of the general and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. Sorry, that was Keynes that said that. And Cambridge actually quotes him on their website. So let's have a quick look. Quick one. Before the interview, Ellen, can you just tell us, what are some of your tips in terms of preparing for the interview?
Yeah, definitely. So a few of the ways in which I personally prepared for my interview was just read everything and anything that I came across, whether that was news articles or books or admissions guidance, literally every single thing. I think just to read as much as possible is very, very important. And then on top of that, do as many practice interviews as you can. So whether that's with your parents or your friends or your school or with tutoring services such as Oxbridge Formula, who do really great one-on-one mock interviews. Do as many as you possibly can, because that will expose you to the widest range of different varieties of questions, will get you really used to thinking on your feet and tackling brand new information that you've never seen before. And I say, just to kind of get into the flow of that and really have had a lot of practice of that under your belt means that you won't be as taken aback by it in the real interview. And then also just make sure you know your personal statement inside and out. So if you've had to put a specific claim in your personal statement, such as I read this particular book, just make sure that you definitely have remembered everything about that book, your key takeaways, your opinions are also really, really important. So they might ask you, what did you think about this book? So you need to have a pre-formulated opinion, and just make sure, if you are invited to interview, that you have a quick flick through those sorts of books again before your interview, just to make sure that you've really refreshed those in your mind. And then finally, I know we've already spoken quite a bit about how important maths is, but maths is a prerequisite for both of the courses. And so the economics interviews at Oxford can also tend to be quite mathematical. So for example, I was asked, like we mentioned earlier, to draw a graph of a specific formula of a specific equation on the board for them. Also, I was asked to do a bunch of differentiation and integration. So just really making sure that you're really solid with your maths A-level content is also really important for preparation.
Okay, fantastic. And then Rohan, what about at the interview?
Yeah, sure. So at the interview, I would definitely recommend trying to really think through everything as systematically as you can, but also taking an intuitive approach, as seen in the third bullet point. What that really means is that you have an appreciation of the wider picture and you're able to give insights without necessarily trawling through like 5 pages of mathematical work. Overall, I think if you're applying for Oxbridge Economics, they like to see people who have maths as a tool, as sort of like, yeah, a part of their tool set. But what's more important is being able to derive the results and explain them and give economic reasoning. And overall, they're trying to see a combination of the two.
Okay, thank you. So 5 guiding words. Roberta, talk us through what makes a fantastic interview answer. By the way, some of these words in the past have been used for what makes a good essay, but also apply to what makes a really good answer.
First thing I would like to say is whenever you're in an interview, it's not a chat, it's an exam. The only difference is you're not using a pen and paper, you're using your voice, your body language. So whenever you're in the interview, regardless of how relaxed they try and make you feel, it's an exam. So everything that you do and say is being tested, including how you respond initially to a question and also how you respond throughout. So if you're given a question or a piece of text to have a look at, make sure you are approaching it the same way you would an entrance exam. For example, you don't go straight in there with, yes, I agree. You have to try and make an argument. And don't forget, whenever you go into your interview, you've got the answers with you, your left and your right hand. You're a balanced economist, so always show balance, always. You have to, as Pearl said earlier, you have to show that you're teachable. So show on one hand what might be the case with the evidence that you've got in the extract in front of you, but also, as Ellen rightly said, from all of that extra reading that you've been doing from today onwards. So you bring in all of that information and show on one hand why you think something might be the case and what the evidence suggests, and then also show a reasoned, balanced approach of why some economists might argue, that's a nice phrase to use, by the way, might look at it from a very different epistemology or a different point of view. The second key thing is, whenever you're giving your answer, show insight. Basically show that you're more clever and more well-read than everybody else sitting outside the exam hall waiting to be interviewed, sitting in that virtual waiting room. You have to beat them. So you have to show that your answer is well structured, well read, that you're bringing in a range of authors as well as a range of sources. And you also have to show that you're up to date. There's no point starting to quote about the 1920s Wall Street crash if you don't know what's happening tax rates in America last week. You need to show insight, and that doesn't come by watching TV. It doesn't come by watching anything. It comes, as Ellen rightly said, by reading, a range of sources. Now, whenever you are giving your interview, your analysis has to be strong. And some of you may have been taught this in school, but just to take you a stage upwards, you have to be using phrases like, and a consequence of this might be, the economic stakeholders that would be affected might be. Now, an A-level student would say the economic stakeholders would be the government. An Oxbridge student would say, well, the domestic government in Australia might be affected by X, whereas the foreign governments in, sub-Saharan Africa might be affected by Y. Instantly, your answer's better because you've made it more nuanced, you've made it more detailed. Logical, it probably is a little bit patronizing for me to say, but you'd be surprised. Logical, as in show your chains of reasoning carefully and how you are developing that point. So make a point and use, this is caused by, the consequence of this would be, the economic shock might lead to, but it might lead to something else. And talk through it as if it were an essay. but it's an oral essay. Don't forget that. It's an oral exam. Now, whenever you're using terms such as, you know, the Keynesian multiplier, and you're trying to show the Fisher equation, and you're trying to bring in all this, you know, quite complex ISLM model that you've been learning about with us in our sessions, you can't just name drop. You have to show that you understand what it is. So there's no point sitting back saying, oh yes, well, the size of the multiplier is 1.2. They'll pick up on it. What do you mean by the multiplier? How do you calculate the multiplier? So don't start being flippant. You have to know your stuff. And the last one is be precise, answer the question. So if they've asked you a question on what's your opinion of the tax rates that China has reduced their corporation tax this week, what's your opinion on it? You have to answer the question. Now, the previous slide, if you can just go back, or don't worry about going back actually, one of the previous slides said be flexible in your thinking. Now that is important, but at the same time, the person that's giving you the interview may well be asking you, why do you think that? Have you not thought about such and such? And they might be trying to change your mind for good reason, or they might be just testing you to see what your knowledge is. So don't automatically change to what the interview thinks or the interviewer thinks. If you have an opinion on something and have evidence of it and make a judgment on it, feel free to back it up and feel free to say, I can appreciate your point. However, I still stand by this because of, and show your evidence for it. But again, answer the question, be precise, and don't go off on a tangent, keep to the question. Now, if we were to look at a question about this, emigration of skilled workers, and I know you're all looking at this thinking, yep, I know the phrases, I know the economic phrases, yep, I can mind read. You're all thinking about brain drain and capital flight. Am I right? Yeah, of course you are. Yeah, that's what you're all thinking, wasn't it? Now, whenever you're actually looking at a question about skilled workers and a developing country, you probably need to know something about emigration patterns and what's been happening in the world of, you know, mobility of labor and the ability to move around the world. COVID's obviously a big factor. Brexit and that free movement of a big factor as well. But whenever you're looking at this question, you have to make sure you unpick the question. What do you mean by beneficial or harmful? You know, how is it harmful? Do you mean economically harmful? And again, whenever you're looking at a question like this, you have to show that insight. Whenever you're looking at the relationships of mobility of labor of developing countries, you should be bringing in the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the names Christine Lagarde, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and give some context. But you don't get context without doing the reading. Now, whenever I teach economics and whenever I tutor on this course, I often say to my students, please will you make either a virtual or a paper file, or if you want to cut out bits of paper, old school, that's fine, but create a country file. So pick a couple of countries, or even just one, maybe an OECD and a slightly more developed country, and compare them. Keep a record of their inflation rates, keep a record of what changes politically, keep a record of what is happening in their economic climate, keep a record of what's happening, their VAT rates, their fiscal policy, their supply side policies, and do it every week. So by the time your exam and interviews come, you're able to then say, oh, well, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I know corruption rates have increased by 81%. Oh, do you? Impressive, insightful, you've done your homework. You don't get into Oxbridge by sitting around just being clever, you have to do the work. So whenever you're looking at this question, remember there's more than just the developing country at stake. You've got lots of other key players, the stakeholders, anyone interested in the country. Mention the environment, bring in COP26, mention the governments, domestic and foreign, which ones, which relationships. Mention the central bank, and please don't get confused with the central bank and the government. They are separate. Bank of England, the government. Bank of China, the government. Bank of Japan, the government. They are separate. And again, bring in your factors of your indicators of economics, CPI and RPI, the difference between the two and what inflation is like. And again, looking at the balance of payments and the current account, and feel free to go into the granular detail of the current account, the balance of trade, trading goods and trading services, investment incomes and net transfers, and be able to talk about purchasing power parity and the value of currency and what's happened, the value of the dollar recently, and why Russia had to change their interest rates to make the ruble slightly more competitive. You should know this because you're reading about it every day. And to be honest, if you're not reading about it, you don't deserve a place, because everybody else that is reading about it will be begging for the place. Remember those percentages that Pearl talked about at the start. So whenever you're looking at a question or a text that you're given, please, please, please try and mention your objectives, your indicators, and your stakeholders. Okay. And if we move on to the next slide, here's a particular.
Before we do that, are we going to ask everyone to put in the chat how they would answer this question? Is that what we decided to do?
Yeah. So let's say 2 or 3 minutes. If you can all just type in how you would approach this question, what kind of points you would put in. No bullet points, please. That's useless. I want full sentences, how you would speak in an interview. And remember, this is an economics session, so can you speak fluent economics, please? We should be starting to see some answers filter in shortly, folks. You're in a time condition. It's called pressure. Get used to it.
Okay, get ready to start pressing send, even if you haven't quite finished. Obviously, we appreciate that you you'd be able to speak a lot quicker than you'll be able to write something necessarily. So 15 more seconds and then press enter with what you've got. Okay, I've got some coming through.
Right, no free riders. Come on, this is economics. No free riding. Get your answers in. Oh, wow, look at you, clever lot. Very good. I want to invite some of you to interview already. Now, quite a lot of you are using the phrases, and this would lead to a loss of economic growth. Remember, economic growth can be two things. It can be actual growth, which is your aggregate demand, or it can be potential growth, which is your long run AS curve. So try and be a little bit more exact of what type of growth. And again, when you're talking about these skilled workers, who are the skilled workers? Try and break that down a little bit more detail, but very good so far.
Okay, should we move on, Roberta?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Sometimes, remember we said that you might be given an article, that King's College said that they might send you an article beforehand. So can you just quickly tell us, Roberta, like how should somebody analyze an article like this?
Yeah, whenever you're given a piece of text, it's quite straightforward. What you need to do is read it a couple of times, and then whenever you look at it and you're about to give your answer, always use and quote the data. The data is your friend. Don't ignore it and start giving a generic answer. You must quote the data. So first of all, use it and quote it. Secondly, you're an economist. That means you have to start manipulating the data. You have to start working out the difference between one year to the next, or how much it is in billions in 2010 compared to the next year. Work out differences, add things together, subtract things, or do a stage further and work out ratios or percentage changes. Top students would do that automatically. So we use the data, manipulate the data, and then show an appreciation or some sort of understanding of why this data should be taken pragmatically, i.e. the limitations of the data. So again, looking at these last couple of bullet points here in the bottom left of the slide, is this data up to date? Well, no, it's not. So 2010, what use is that to me today in 2022? Are they using averages? No idea. Don't even know the source of the data. And is the source reliable? Is it subject to any bias? Is it funded by a corrupt regime? Don't know. Has it been adjusted for inflation? Is it real data, or is it purchasing power parity? Don't know. And again, I've underlined that bit, several multiples. A skilled migrant, what skills, what jobs? No idea, doesn't tell me. May earn several multiples, what, twice as much, 3 times as much, 10 times as much? Doesn't tell me. So question the data. Always show the question of the data. So describe it, manipulate it, and explain it. But again, show that you understand what a remittance is. And from your answers that you gave me, no one used that phrase. A remittance is where you have an economic migrant that leaves their home country. So for example, if you were to leave the UK with your first class degree from Oxbridge and you go off to work in Egypt, let's say, you're working in Egypt, you're earning lots of money and you send it home to your family every month. That is a negative remittance out of Egypt and a positive into the UK. And that's recorded where? On the current account. Balance of payments, don't forget. So money coming in and money leaving. And again, you need to show that understanding, definitions of your key terms, the insight that we talked about. Now, looking at whenever you're in the interview, what a fairly standard, A-level answer would be. And this, this stuff on the left here would be what I would expect from some of my pretty good students at school. One way in which these skilled workers, such as those who are bankers and doctors, etc., leaving the country is brain drain. Quite nice so far, well done. This is when the skilled workers leave the country in search of jobs elsewhere for better pay and better quality of life. This is detrimental, it's quite a nice word, because it takes top earners out of the country, taking with them not only their skills, but their tax-paying potential. And thus they will not be paying tax in that particular tax of the economy. For example, countries where there's higher tax rates, 30, 40, or 50% or more, can create more fiscal pressure. That's a gorgeous phrase, love that phrase, try and remember that. This may cause a gap in tax revenue for the government and so put more pressure on them to borrow. If one of my students handed in a piece of homework tomorrow that said that, I'd be very happy to give my A-level student a big fat A. That's lovely writing, but that's not Oxbridge. Let's have a look now at what you should be saying in your interview. So we take what an average A-level student says and we make it better. Now watch this. One way in which immigration can harm developing countries is significant loss to both the quantity and the quality of human capital. I'm not talking about people anymore, I'm talking about human capital, commonly known as brain drain. This may involve graduate or postgraduate qualifications with MBAs or PhDs, creative entrepreneurs, skilled professionals. Now look at the list on the left and then look at the list on the right. Doctors, engineers, bankers, consultants, teachers, vets, those with STEM or quaternary sectors leaving en masse. Just sounds better. More granular detail and more in depth. Look at the difference between the left and the right. Now, let's develop our logical chains of reasoning further. As I said, logical answers. What's going to happen as a consequence of this? This loss of such important skilled human capital is of huge economic detriment to the country. One reason for this is the huge cost of education these workers have been to the government. It seems almost a waste as they are now leaving and taking with them not only their skills, you all thought skills, present, but you didn't think future, and their vision, which is a huge blow to the government fiscal pot. Remember the fiscal pot, difference between government spending and taxation. Perhaps, I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't, I'm using indefinite language. Perhaps, two-handed, remember, balance. These governments should indeed rethink their spending on education, as many do leave for the glamour of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So now I'm saying where they're going to, this mass immigration out of the country, where they're going. Likewise, remember that phrase, some economists would argue that India loses huge numbers of those in the medical and STEM industries who are incentivized to relocate as economic migrants in search of higher paid jobs, where, such as the US, Germany, and the UK. Real life examples from my country file that I already know. They are not only attracted by huge wage potential, remember future, but also by the living standards. And it's known as the HDI, the Human Development Index, and the GDP per capita, gross domestic product per person, which are very robust indicators. I love that phrase. Please use it in your interview and think of me, of the US, UK, and Germany. And they are much higher than, let's say, India, Cape Verde, or Lesotho. I bet you nobody else mentions those countries. Bet you they don't. You do, you're original. And these migrants take with them their human potential capital, hugely harming potential economic growth of the Indian economy. So I've talked about actual growth, potential growth, real life examples, indicators, and I've shown insight, and it's all logical. That's how you get your place. Ask Nikolai if you don't believe me. Again, really quickly flying through this. Consequently, another chain of reasoning. The productive potential might be hampered because we see sluggish growth, if anything, in the Keynesian short run aggregate supply curve being reached in India. Remember, I'm now breaking down AS and AD, which might render any future potential growth sluggish in terms of the quantity and quality of that factor of production. And I don't need to go through the rest of this because you get the point. The one on the left is so much more basic than the one on the right. But the one on the left is a pretty decent A level. So you need to be precise. Look at the differences.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Roberta. So if everyone could just put in the chat, what is one thing that you're going to take away from this to add to your interviews? Let us know very quickly in the chat. And then we are going to move on to some TMUA questions and then a Q&A. So thank you very much for bearing with us. We're trying to cover a lot today. Somebody says detail. Somebody else says robust indicators, obscure country profiles, much more detail in the answer. Don't skip explaining any key term, consistently reviewing countries, developing chains of reasoning with economic examples, analysis of articles, read 3 and quote data and manipulate it, be more specific about what curves you're talking about, give specific examples and case studies, robust indicators, somebody else. So they're all going to use that and think of you, Roberta. So
just before I do, just to see who really is up for it, can I just ask you all really quickly to put into the chat one thing that's happened in the UK economy this week?
Actually, let's leave that one for right now. Just because of time, I think we're going to run out of time in a second.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So how, look, we've just talked about interviews quickly. How do we prepare you here at the Oxbridge Formula for interviews? So weekly workshops, right? Roberta is going to be running our weekly workshops as well as some of our other tutors as well. So what do? We discuss extension material beyond the A-level. You will learn how to discuss and respond to challenges, as Nicola said, and be put in the hot seat. We're going to be looking in our economic summer school at key interview topics that don't really come up a lot at A-level. So game theory, logic problems, and then we're going to intensively discuss those. Group interview courses. We have something really unique about how we run mock interviews. We have 10 students on a Zoom call. every student will either be applying to economics or economics and management, and every student will do an interview, and you get to watch the interviews of the other 9 students. So firstly, it's highly pressured doing it in front of a lot of people, which is great practice. But secondly, while the other students are working through their questions, you're not just going to sit and watch. You're going to be answering those questions yourself at the same time. So very, very good experience. You get to learn not only from how other people answer, but also what feedback they're given, as well as the feedback you get given yourself. You come away with a numerical score and plenty of feedback for further improvement. Also, we run lots of mock interviews. So Roberta, Rohan, Ellen, all of them are mock interviewers for us. So we give you sets of 3 mock interviews and with lots of challenging feedback between each interview. Lots of realistic feedback and also points to improve. And also one-to-one tuition. So you can get more one-to-one mocks during those. You can practice specific topics. All of our tutors have been through the process themselves successfully. So that is a really, really, really good thing for you to do. So scan the QR code if you think that working with our tutors would be of benefit for you, or click on oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. That is oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. What I think we'll do is we'll answer, we've got quite a few questions in the chat. I'm going to take 5 now. Then we're going to go and do some TMUA stuff, and we're going to come back for the rest. Okay. So in the chat, I have, will students who don't take A-level economics be disadvantaged in the application? Rohan, what do you think for that one?
I think, again, it needs to be assessed in the broader context. For example, if your school doesn't offer specific A-levels, say if you wanted to take further maths, but your school doesn't offer it, then it's a different situation to if it's a very known fact that your school churns out many further mathematicians and you don't take it.
Oh, so this is for A-level economics?
Yeah, I guess the same also works for economics too. I've seen it to be very common for economics. Yeah, typically it's schools perhaps not offering further maths or economics, and then they tend to take one or the other. So if it's not possible, for example, to take economics, try to, for example, take further maths or an AS in economics outside, and the same also works in reverse.
Okay, fantastic. And somebody says, would you recommend doing further maths, or would you recommend doing further maths for economics, or would AS be enough? I think we kind of answered that point. With the more maths you can do, the better problem solving skills you have, and the more advantageous it will be, at least for economics. Ellen, I don't know if you want to kind of mention anything from the E&M side.
Yeah, I'd say having a look at the statistics earlier, and from my own personal experience, I'd say about half people do have further maths, half the people don't. It's not a requirement. I didn't take further maths, and I have been able to cope completely fine. But then again, because of the flexibility of the course, you can pick and choose your papers. And I've picked probably the less mathsy side of the course to do my finals papers in. So I say, if you wanted to do more quantitative economics or econometrics, then further maths might be helpful for you. But I didn't personally, so I've not had any issues with not having had further maths.
Okay, fantastic. And somebody says, is step maths helpful for economics? So the actual paper step, I would say similarly, it's helpful for developing the thinking skills, the problem solving skills that would be helpful for just being able to manipulate tough maths in an economics degree, but it's not actually required as an entrance requirement. And it wouldn't be my first focus if I was going to, I would say there are shorter maths questions, which will probably be more useful for the types of questions you'll get in the admissions test. That being said, I think the kind of maths that's tested in the TMUA, we're going to see in just a second, the kind of concepts that we look at, for example, necessary and sufficient conditions, which we'll see in just a second, come up a lot in STEP. So from that perspective, I actually think it could be quite useful for TMUA, now that I think about it. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I just want to say, firstly, it's also useful for interview practice, especially things like sketching and very pure questions. I believe there's one college that has used STEP for economics, but I can't remember which one it is. So it just might be worth looking at your college's website if you're applying to Cambridge.
That's a good point. Yes. Okay. Let's quickly move on to TMUA. I'm going to come back to more answers in just a second. Sorry for all this chopping and changing today. So TMUA, I did mention that the questions are quite tough. Before I go into it, let's just have a quick 15-second break because we have got, this is quite intense. Everyone get ready with your pen and paper for this next bit. But like I say, if you are keen to work with us, then go to oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. In fact, I think some of our tutors need to go shortly, so we might do a bit more Q&A right now. I'll keep that on the screen for 15 seconds. We'll do a bit more Q&A and we'll look at TMUA straight after that. So oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. Any more questions that you have in the chat, put them in there and we'll go through them now. Okay, so there are some questions about the cost of the program. We have a few different options available. The best thing is, if you're interested in learning more, going and getting yourself booked onto a consultation. As I said already, we offer free assessments, and based on that, we can give you an idea of what we feel would be the best package for you. So that to find out more information, the easiest thing would be to get yourself booked into a consultation. Somebody's asking about success rates as well. For specific courses and specific packages, we've got different success rates. So get yourself booked on. Again, can be something that we can discuss for sure. All right. Okay, so let's carry on with the Q&A then. If I fail the interview, is there any chance I can get into Oxbridge? You can reapply. So if you don't pass this year, if you fail your interview, you can't really get into Oxbridge this year, but there is an opportunity for you to reapply again next year. Feel free, any of the tutors, to let me know if you have any further comments to make on that.
I just want to say, like, lots of people who do get in thought like one of their interviews or one significant part of one of their interviews went very badly. And they are, firstly, they know you're going to be nervous. Secondly, they expect you to struggle. They design the interview questions to make you struggle and then see how you react. And thirdly, like if one thing goes badly, you can redeem yourself with better questions. So I think one thing not to do is like give up if it starts off badly.
I also find that in their, like, a lot of people in their first time applying really underestimate the amount of work that they're going to have to do, the amount of extra reading they're going to have to do, the amount of preparation they need to do for the interviews. And they, you know, a lot of students applying to Oxbridge are the best in their school. So you don't really know what your competition is like. You're going to have to try and get within this top 5%. And I think, yeah, just being the best in your school isn't necessarily enough. So they go through the process, and then the second year they realize, okay, yeah, this is serious. And in the second year, I have seen lots of people very successfully reapply. So that would be something that I would say, try not to let that be the case by doing the preparation and realizing how difficult it is from now. Somebody asked about the median salaries if we do postgraduate from Oxford. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the stats on that right now. Can be something that we could.
I did actually look this up. It's
okay.
It's like 90,000 for an MBA, and then it increases from there if you do like more specialist degrees. But like median, well, I don't know. For an MBA, the salaries are going to be all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked how frequently we update our material. We update it every year. All of our videos, we create new videos every year, and our courses are updated every year, etc. Ellen, what was your EPQ topic?
I did my EPQ on the causes of the dot-com bubble, which was the stock market crash in the technology sector in the early 2000s. So quite kind of economics-y management related. I wanted to do something that was on market failures, and the credit crunch has so much information out there. It was a bit too vast. So I picked something a bit more concise, but it was super interesting and really interesting to look at all the different technology companies as well for that.
Okay, fantastic. Somebody else, is there an admissions test for land economy? It used to be the TSA, but recently that's been scrapped. I don't believe it has been replaced with anything, which just means your interview is going to be that much more important, and your personal statement for land economy. If I were to write an EPQ, what topic would you suggest for economics? I don't know if I could really kind of give you like answer here, but I don't know if anyone has any like suggestions for interesting things to look into. We would kind of need to know you better. And I think, as Ellen said, look at your own interests and see what actually interests you to research. If anyone wants to add anything, feel free. All right.
I was going to say, generally, you will be researching it for quite a long time, several months. So just make sure it's something that you definitely do feel an interest for and that you are quite passionate about. Some other interesting things in economics might be game theory or labour economics or behavioural economics, which are all interesting things which you can do a much deeper dive in than what you've done in A-levels.
Okay, fantastic. Is the economics course essay based? How much of the content is essay based? Is it a good idea to study economics if you're passionate about it, even if your essay writing skills aren't the best? Well, yeah, so the ECA essay, which used to be something that you were tested on, is kind of not really in the picture anymore. So I would say our courses are a lot more discussion based. So how can you form a good argument? There might be some written work, but that isn't something you're doing in test conditions.
And I think they're asking about the degree course.
Oh, sorry. Okay, fair enough. Yes, Ellen and Rohan.
For economics and management, all of the management papers do have essay components. So that's definitely something to watch out for. As I mentioned, though, you can skew your course a lot more economics focused. So you can do 3/4 of economics, and the essays in the economic side of the course do also take up about 2/3 of the paper. So essays are a very big component.
Yeah, and also for Cambridge Econ, you can make it as essay-based or as mathematical/problem-solving based as you want. That said, there will always be an element of essays. In first year, I think we've touched on this already, but Cambridge Economics tends to be a lot more rigorous and set in stone in terms of which modules you need to take, even though there's, as the degree progresses, it becomes a bit more free. That means that for the first year, especially if you're taking politics or history by force, there will be some essays involved with that.
Okay, thank you, Rohan. All right. So if someone starts preparing for the TSA or TMUA after the AS level exam in June, is it too late? I mean, given that we're in March and you have 4 extra months to do some preparation, I would say you'd be wasting some of that time if you didn't start doing that preparation a bit earlier. So spring, as we are right now, is an ideal time. The quicker you can get, the better. The quicker you can get started, the better. So in terms of costs, again, like I say, the best thing is to book a consultation. All of that will be something that we could discuss on the call. You recommend a student to pick further maths, A-level, now. Okay, would you recommend that a student does AS or A-level further maths now to make their Oxford Economics and Management application stand out, or is it better to have 3 subjects and an EPQ? Ellen.
Just again, half and half, probably do further maths and don't. I would say it's definitely not a requirement, and if you think that you'd get more interest and enjoyment out of doing an EPQ, then I'd say do an EPQ, and that further maths, you can pick up any additional maths at uni as well. And also something important to note is that Oxford run maths courses in the first year as well. So if you feel like your maths is not quite up to scratch as much as you'd like it to be, then you can join the maths tuition courses instead, and they're just a bit additional once a week to help you get up to the same sort of speed as the potential further maths students. That's just something to bear in mind.
Okay, excellent. So somebody says, would you recommend applying to Oxbridge despite not being able to meet the financial cost of studying there? Do scholarships and financial aid exist for EU or international students? Ooh, that's a great question. Chris?
I don't know 100%. My impression is that so some scholarships do exist. Sometimes it depends on your country of origin. I haven't kept track in the last year of how EU students are treated now. There's probably, in terms of like individual scholarships, like directed to people from certain countries, there's probably more for non-EU students, because those have existed for a long time, because historically EU students could apply just like UK students, and now that's changed. So it's worth just researching online, I think. There is a like scholarship finder you can use to see if there's anything relevant to you.
Okay, excellent. Is your course useful for PPE applicants? Yes. Do get yourself booked onto a consultation with me if you are interested in PPE. It is absolutely something that we provide. Someone's confused. Are both TSA and TMUA used for E&M? No, E&M is just TSA and economics is TMUA. So I know they are quite similar sounding. Thinking skills assessment for E&M, test of mathematics for university applications is for Cambridge economics. Okay. Are there any differences on the focuses in the interviews relative to the college you applied to, Rohan?
Yes, there are. It depends on which particular college. Some colleges tend to be a bit more mathematical. Other colleges, for example, ask you to have an assessment at interview, namely, for example, Gonville and Keys in Cambridge. There are some colleges as well that ask you to read an article beforehand, and that helps frame the discussion in that sense, whereas other interviews might tend to focus a bit more on trying to ask questions on the spot about material that you may not have covered.
Okay, well, I appreciate, thank you very much for both being here. I know that you need to head off, so I'll let you go. Thank you, Rohan and Ellen. We are going to quickly do one TMUA question just now, because I want to show you guys how hard it is. So let's move on to that. Hopefully I can find it. Is it here? Yes, okay. We're going to do one TMUA question. Yeah, we'll go from there. So Chris, TMUA paper 2 topic.
Yeah, I think just before we look at the question itself, we need to cover some vocabulary you might not have seen at A-level yet, or only very briefly. So necessary and sufficient conditions come up in like half the questions in paper 2. It's one of the most common topics for the logic and proof section. One piece of advice we give our students is always translate necessary and sufficient conditions into conditional statements, like implications. So something like A implies B. That relates to sufficient and necessary as follows. If you have A implies B, then A is called the sufficient condition for B, and B is, A in this context, the sufficient condition, and B is the necessary condition. So A is sufficient for B, B is necessary for A. Just to show some examples that might illustrate why that's the case. So x equals 5 is a sufficient condition for x squared equals 25, because if you know x equals 5, that implies that x squared is 25. X squared is 25 is a necessary condition for x equals 5, because if x is going to equal 5, it had better also be the case that x squared equals 25. Note that x squared equals 25 isn't sufficient for x equals 5, because it could be that x equals minus 5 instead. Similar example was x is an integer is sufficient for x is rational, because if something is an integer, it's also a rational number. X is rational is necessary for x is an integer.
Slightly slower, because I think it's all new concepts for people.
Okay, so I was worried we were going to run out of time. Okay, so x is a rational number is a necessary condition for x is an integer, because we just said.
Yeah, so basically, if you're an integer, then you're definitely a rational number. So it's sufficient to be an integer to be rational. But if you, so explain the next bit.
Well, as you just said, like x is an integer implies x is rational. And so that means x is rational is necessary for x to be an integer.
In other words, if you're an integer, then it's necessary that you're rational. Okay, and then lastly?
Okay, another example with discriminants of quadratics. So you know that if the discriminant of the quadratic is negative, then the quadratic has no real roots. So that means that the quadratic having no real roots is necessary for the discriminant being negative, but the implication also goes in the other direction. If it has no real roots, then the discriminant has to be negative. So that means the quadratic having no real roots is a sufficient condition. So sometimes something can be necessary and sufficient, but not always.
Okay.
We'll quickly talk about counterexamples as well. By the way, this is the kind of thing we cover in more detail in the kind of TMUA workshops we do. Suppose you do have an implication statement. So we write it as A implies B. There's often an implicit like always, or for all x, or for any x, or something like that, depending on the context.
Chris, just really emphasize the key points here, yeah.
Okay, so this is saying like, okay, if A is true, then B must always also be true. So if we look at one of our examples, x squared equals 25 implies x equals 5, which by the way is incorrect. But sometimes you have to analyze incorrect statements. So what would this mean? It would be saying for any x, if x squared is 25, then x has to be 5. That's the only possibility. And well, we just said that's an incorrect statement, and incorrect implication statements have counterexamples. Because there's an implicit always, and they're not actually always correct. So,
I think the thing I want to emphasize here is that when we say A implies B, yeah, the implicit always. So if we're saying x squared is 25 implies that x equals 5. So we're saying for any x, so this is the for any, that's the important bit here. And let's look for something which makes this break. Can we break this sentence?
yeah, so well, so a counterexample is something that shows it's not always, it's not for any, like not for every x. There's something that shows doesn't always hold. So it's a specific case for which the first part of the condition, the A, is true, but the B doesn't follow. The B is still false. So we know our counterexample here. Hopefully you know that if x squared equals 25, you can't conclude x equals 5, so it could be that x equals minus 5 instead. So that's our counterexample, because it makes x squared equals 25 true. Okay. If x equals minus 5, then x squared equals 25 is true. But it makes our B, our x equals 5, false, because obviously minus 5 and 5 are not the same number. So it's not always true that x equals 5. And so we've given a counterexample that shows that implication is false.
Yeah, so just to emphasize then, if you've got something implies something else, and you're trying to find an example which doesn't work, you want it to obey the first part. So you do want x squared to equal 25, but you want the second bit to be false. So the example x equals minus 5 made this true, but that bit wasn't right. So therefore it was a counterexample to this particular statement to show that this isn't always true. It's not true for any x. Okay.
So here's our example TMUA question. Pavel, would you like me to?
Down. Yeah, can you just read it, but read it a little bit slower, Chris, because I think you're going. I know we're running out of time, but for the people who are here, they're kind of keen to look at this. So
Okay,
yeah.
okay. So I'll read it and then we can start the timer. So we have an arithmetic sequence T. Oh, I think we want the definition to come up for this. So
Okay.
just because not everyone might have seen this at school yet. You will have seen arithmetic sequences, you just might not have seen the term. So an arithmetic sequence is one where the difference between consecutive terms is a constant, which is what we're labeling D. So we've got this example, okay, if we've got a sequence 1, 3, 5, 7, etc., but a constant difference between consecutive terms of 2. So that's our value of D. And also here, the first term we're labeling A, which is 1. And that's what it means to be an arithmetic sequence. So suppose we call our arithmetic sequence T. It has first term A.
Just honestly, please slow down a teeny bit. It would be really appreciated. Thank you.
It has first term A and common difference D.
Yeah.
Where A and D, it says, are non-zero and they're integers, so whole numbers. Yeah. And we're given a definition of property P. It says for some positive integer m, the sum of the first m terms of the sequence is equal to the sum of the first 2m terms of the sequence. And it says, for example, when A equals 11 and D equals minus 2,
yeah,
the sequence T has property P because 11 plus 9 plus 7 plus 5 equals 11 plus 9 plus 7 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1 plus minus 1 plus minus 3. So the sum of the first 4 terms equals the sum of the first 8 terms. That's an example of having property P. And then we're just given 2 statements and we're asked which of them are true. So statement 1 is for sequence T to have property P, it's a sufficient condition that A times D is less than 0. And statement 2 is for sequence T to have the property P, it's a necessary condition that D is even. And then our 4 options are basically neither of those are true, or only statement 1 is true, only statement 2 is true, or both of them are true.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to give you 3 minutes now, because we've read, it's 3 minutes 45. We read the question in 45 seconds. You've got 3 minutes left to figure out A, B, C, or D. And what do you think? Now, this is quite tough, But that is the point. TMUA is a tough exam. So see what you can do. And we're gonna, in 3 minutes, we're gonna go through this question. You have 20 seconds left. Start putting your answers in the chat. Okay, if you haven't already, put your answer in the chat now. 5 seconds left. 5, 4. Okay, answers in the chat. Okay, we've definitely got a big variety of answers, A, B, C, and D, fully used. So, Chris, go for it. How would we answer this?
Okay, so I think the first thing as approaching this is that we said it's normally easiest to reinterpret necessary and sufficient in terms of implications. So let's write down the implications we need to check. So it's asking, is AD being negative a sufficient condition? And we didn't mention this mnemonic at the start, that like sufficient conditions come at the start of a implication. So like we're S in sufficient, S in start. So we want the AD is negative at the start. So if AD is less than 0, then T has to have property P. That's what we're checking. And then number 2 is the other way around, because it's a necessary condition, and necessary conditions come at the end. So we're stressing the end there. So we want to check if T has property P, then D has to be even. Is that true? So that's what we need to check. And so let's just talk about a few ways we can make this easier for ourselves. If we want to do this really quickly. Firstly, look at, they gave us an example where A equals 11 and D equals -2. I think it's good exam technique to just check, does that actually help me with either of the implications? So maybe it would be a counterexample already. unfortunately, they weren't that nice. It's literally just an example, and it's probably worth checking. And it is, like when you're checking whether an implication is true, it's normally easiest to start by trying to imagine what a counterexample would be. And then if you can't do that, then maybe think, okay, why does this have to be true? Not always the case, but it's often a good way to start. So we'll just put that to one side, as that's probably how we're going to begin this. You can't do this algebraically because you should, well, if you haven't studied this at school, you might not have seen it in this form, but there is a formula for the sum of the first m terms or the first 2m terms of a sequence with first term a and common difference d. There's a formula, but we prefer not to do algebra if we can help it. So because we're going to start off looking for counterexamples, actually it's probably a good idea just to look at some example sequences and maybe try and construct a very simple counterexample, try and do it in the simplest way possible. And then, again, if that doesn't work, then we can think about why it's not working, but we'll try that first. And having a few simple examples often helps you understand what's going on. One way to keep things simple is to make a and d smaller. In particular, d equals 1, so like they're just consecutive numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4 is an arithmetic sequence with d equals 1. That's going to be as simple as possible, and it's often a good way to start. And finally, we have this technique we call articulating the abstract. So when you're given something very abstract, like this is all in terms of letters, right? You've got T and P and A and D. Let's try and either put it into like natural language, like just to imagine you explaining this to someone else in like normal English rather than math speak, or try and make a picture for yourself. And here, actually, I think it's easiest to do by the picture method. So if we go forwards a bit, we're articulating the abstract, but we can do that with a picture. So if we just look at the example they gave, they didn't say this explicitly, but for their example, m was equal to 4. So for the sequence to have this property, we just want there to be at least one value of m for which this works. And if we see in the example, what we're really looking at is we've got an initial sequence of length 4, and then a second sequence of length 4. And the first one could add up to anything. What really matters is the second one that adds up to 0. Because then the sum to m and the sum to 2m are going to be equal, right? Because the second half just adds up to 0. It doesn't make a difference to the total sum. And that makes it easier to kind of try to construct counterexamples. We're looking for a sequence of things that adds up to 0, and then a sequence of the same length before that. So if we go forwards a bit, let's try and do this with, say, d equals 1, and we'll just try some examples. So one thing hopefully you notice is, okay, if we're going to have stuff adding up to 0, we can't just have everything being positive. So we want to check the implication, what happens if a times d is negative. So if we're going to try d equals 1, we need to make a negative to actually test that. Remember, a counterexample would make a d is less than 0 true, but it would make the following part, t has property p, false. So we're looking for a case where AD is negative, but the sequence doesn't have property p. So, okay, the simplest case is maybe a equals -1. That's as small as we can make the size of a and have it be negative. But that does actually have property p if you choose m equals 1, because the sum of the first 1 terms is -1, and the sum of the first 2 terms is also -1, because we have a sequence of length 1 which adds up to 0. It's just that 0.
Down a little bit.
And we have a sequence before that which is also length 1. So that's why m equals 1.
If m was 1, we're looking at just the first 1 term, then it adds up to -1. If we're looking at the first 2m terms, which is the first 2 terms, that also adds up to -1. So that does have the property p. So we haven't found a counterexample yet. So let's try another one, see if we can find another counterexample.
Yeah, well, at this point, I'm not just trying stuff at random. Like, we can't just try loads of random values of a.
Yeah.
I'm actually at this point expecting it to work, because I can see there's not going to be many subsequences that add up to 0, because there's a lot more positive numbers in the sequence than negative. So I actually kind of suspect at this point, okay, probably this isn't going to work if I just choose a different value of a. So if I try -2, then let's look at what m could be. We could try m equals 1. So we've got a sequence of length 1 that adds up to 0. It's just the third term 0. But we'd want another sequence of the same length in front of that, and we don't have that. We've got 2 numbers in front of that instead of 1. we could also have the sequence -101, that adds up to 0. But that's of length 3, and we don't have another sequence in front of length 3, we've only got one number in front. We could try -2 -1012, that adds up to 0, but obviously there's nothing in front of that, that can't work. And then we don't have any more because we've run out of space. We don't have a -3, for instance. So we've checked all the values m could possibly have, and none of them work. So this sequence doesn't have property p. And this is a counterexample. And it's basically by making A and D as small as possible and as simple as possible, and by having a picture in our heads as to what we were looking for, we could easily construct a counterexample. There's other ways of approaching this as well, but this is like a nice simple way to do it. If we quickly think about statement 2, then we want to test if a sequence T has property P, then D has to be even. So saying if whatever sequence you can make that works, it has to be one where D is even, or there's no sequences that work where D is odd. But we actually just kind of saw a case where the sequence works, but D was odd. We saw this case where A is -1 and D is 1, and it did have property P with m equals 1, but D was equal to 1, which isn't even. So that's a counterexample to statement 2. And so that shows statement 2 isn't true either. I just want to say, like, another way you could come at this is just take any sequence of, say, 3 terms that adds up to 0, and then just work backwards 3 terms. So the 3 before that would be -2, -3, -4. So you can kind of construct your sequence backwards. And there's other ways of doing this as well. But in any case, we showed 1 and 2 were both false. So our answer is that neither of them is true, which is option A.
Okay, excellent. Not that many people did put option A, but definitely a few people did. Okay, excellent, guys. So look, TMUA is tough. I don't think it's easy. Like, some of this stuff is not stuff that you learn at school very much at all. In fact, TMUA has its own actual 70-page syllabus that you're meant to learn. Here at the Oxbridge formula, we actually give you, well, we do all these fast and fluent examples. We don't have time to go through it now, unfortunately. But we basically give you, we not only give you all the video solutions for all of the past paper questions, we also have lots of extra mocks that we made up. We're doing a mock day where there are own mocks that you get to do in time conditions and figure out what you're going to get in the real thing. We also, throughout the year, run a TMUA paper 2 course. So we'll be going through necessary and sufficient conditions. We'll be going through negating a statement. We'll be going through logic. We'll be going through proofs throughout the year. So when it comes to the actual thing, you're able to do that question in 3 minutes. No problem. So it's something that I would strongly recommend. This is something that we have helped lots and lots of students with, and it's probably even more competitive for computer science. We've had many students successful doing TMUA with us for computer science. So if this is something that you believe would help you, then get yourself booked in at oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. That is oxbridgeformula.co.uk/consultation. And are there any last minute questions for us now before we go? If there's anything, put it in the Q&A. I think there was a couple here that we didn't get time to answer before with the students, but if there's anything else. Yes, we're going to have a recording of today. It should be sent out in the next couple of days by Ben, so look out for that. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all very much for staying for 2.5 hours. Really appreciate it. Oh, something popped up in here. What reading materials do we recommend? I would say grab yourself a copy of the Oxbridge Formula book. It's got loads of reading suggestions in there. That'd be a really good thing. Alternatively, if you do work with any of our tutors, they will be able to give you books that you would personally be interested in. Anything else? Any other questions? The mock questions we would have looked at if time. Probably won't send those through. Again, all of them are available. They're all from the mock. They're all from past papers. If you want to look at them, you can. We have videos to all of the questions available for our students as well. So if you do end up working with us, then you'll be able to get access to the whole library of videos as well. Somebody said in the chat, thank you very much for this informative webinar. You are most welcome. What if you had to say your number one takeaway, what would you say? Put it in the chat and then we'll head off. Put your number one takeaway in there. The recording will be available. Yes, of course it will. And do show your parents as well. I think especially the first half, where it was less sort of subject specific, but more about the application process, would be pretty happy. So be critical and extend my current interest in economics. It's harder than you think. Start studying now. The sheer knowledge required beyond the scope of A-level. That we should sign up for the Oxbridge formula. Yeah, it's a good idea. And yeah, that the admissions tests are very tough. Do lots of extra reading and past papers. Create fact files for interviews. I'll definitely make a country file now to increase my understanding and knowledge. Excellent. All right. Well, as we said earlier, good luck to all of you for your preparation. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end. Somebody says, my number one takeaway is to start now. Look deep into the subject, including country profile. Excellent, 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 excellent. Well, thank you very much. Best of luck for your applications, and yeah, let us know how it all goes. Okay, take care. Thanks a lot. Bye.